Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Josh Lofton, Cropping Systems Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. Over the next several weeks, we're going to have a couple of videos discussing soil health practices. Recently, we received a Conservation Innovation Grant from NRCS looking and evaluating the perception of soil health. It's a topic that often gets discussed and sometimes is very divisive on what people believe is soil health and what is healthy for our soil. We're going to take a couple of different interviews from academics, NRCS personnel, and growers around the state to see how they view soil health practices and conservation practices and how it fits into their production system. The first one, what we're going to talk about today, was intended to actually talk more about soil health testing, and we actually had a nice discussion on the general perception and concepts of soil health. So I wanted to have this. We are also going to have that video talking about soil health testing and what makes a good soil health test, but I also wanted this video to where we could get a more generalized view from a couple of individuals with a couple of different perspectives, both a crop perspective and a soil perspective on what is soil health. I hope you enjoyed the video and check back in future weeks where we will have more soil health, soil conservation videos. Yeah, so today we're going to go over something a little more unusual and a little more interesting. Gonna talk to our two guests here about soil health and soil health testing. Why don't the two of you introduce yourself, tell a little bit about yourself, and we'll kind of go from there. So we'll start off with Lisa.
My name is Lisa Fultz. I'm an associate professor at Louisiana State University, and I work with the Ag Center. Majority of my work is coming at the perspective of soil conservation and different practices that we can use to keep soil in people's fields and less in waterways, whether that's a bayou for locally, streams, creeks, rivers, and ultimately the Gulf Coast. I've been at LSU since 2014. It's been pretty fun so far.
And your background's predominantly in soils, is that right?
Yeah, so
You
I have,
dabble in crops, but would prefer to keep it below ground.
yeah, I actually got my soils minor at Oklahoma State University and a master's from there as well. And I've pretty much been studying soils since my very first one there at OSU. So,
And so we got an OSU grad, and Jason, you yourself here at OSU, but also a native Okie. So tell anybody that doesn't know a little bit about yourself and your history, your background.
All right. Well, I'm currently into quarantine, so that's why I'm in this relaxed condition. But yeah, I've worked in soil management, manure management in my graduate degree, and now I'm the soil and water conservation extension specialist at OSU. I've done work on cover crops, crop rotations, no-till management, and I'm working a lot now on irrigation management. And then we have some laboratory procedures we're looking at and trying to develop for low cost, high throughput type soil health assessment tools. And so that's why Josh has got me here today. But I've worked in the realm of soil quality and now soil health for the last 12 years as a faculty member at OSU, on and off.
And you get a lot of background in like CO2 flux. That's kind of what you did when you started here at OSU, and some of your background at ARS. And
I work a lot with green. I forget that I do actually quite a little bit with greenhouse gas emissions, specifically looking at how agricultural management influences nitrous oxide emissions. And we can look at methane and CO2 emissions from the soil, or transfers in and out of the soil with the methods we use.
Okay, well, very good. So we'll go ahead and kind of get started. And the term soil health we talked about, that's what we're going to be talking about here today. And I don't want to call it a divisive subject, but it is a very heavily discussed subject, and a lot of people with very differing opinions on what soil health is, how beneficial it is, and what we can actually do to improve the health of our soil. And I think part of the reason for that is we just can't agree on a definition, or we can't marry a lot of individual definitions together. So we'll kind of start off on getting each of your opinions on, well, what exactly is soil health? What makes soil health? And if you were to look at a field, kind of what in your opinion makes it healthy or not? We'll go Jason first this time.
Well, from the concept of soil health and soil quality, I would say it's the ability of the soil to provide productivity while minimizing the offsite impact of that soil management. For me, that's soil health. It's what used to be soil quality. We can start talking about the microbes and all these complex things, and trying to identify and figure out, what's going on in a specific soil under a specific management and compare that to other management. And that's where the challenge kind of falls for me. Years ago, probably 2010 or 11, I was talking with one of the state conservationists, and this NRCS, they historically look at conservation as a practice-based approach. So they provide cost share based on the practices that you impose on your land. And I told him, I said, wouldn't it be nice? Because I knew guys at the time, and this was before grazing cover crops was even popular by most no-till cover crop people's perspective. But I had guys that were heavily grazing cropland that was beautiful soil with good structure, very apparent organic matter and microbial activity. You could see it. And I didn't test it, of course, but when you dug in the soil, it looked really nice. And the challenge was, as I asked him, I said, wouldn't it be nice, because he was out of compliance with everything the NRCS was saying at the time, because he was grazing the hell out of this cropland. And I told the NRCS conservationist, I said, wouldn't it be nice if you could just test the soil and analyze it for various factors, and then provide, and that be a proof of compliance? And he said, yeah, that would be nice. And so that's part of the thing that drives me on some of this, is it would be nice to get some of these soil characteristics that we could quantify and then use to provide evidence of compliance with conservation. The challenge is the diversity of soil and production environments in the state of Oklahoma makes those numbers to where they can mean very different things depending on where you are and what you're doing. And so that's my 2 cents.
Mine actually wouldn't diverge a lot from that. I would add to that last part is, I think one of the things that makes it a little more difficult to really wrap your head around is that we're so used to like biological and physical, or not, sorry, chemical and physical properties, where you get a number, it's within a specific range, and that tells you high, low, medium, good, not so good, that kind of thing. Biological characteristics don't necessarily fit in that model, because a lot of the times what you're looking at is, how does this property relate to something else? Because you can get a number for any of the things we measure, but part of it is we don't know, is that good or bad? But also sometimes good or bad is relative to what is that number compared to like soil organic matter, or if we're looking at like enzyme activity, is that number changing over time? So it's not you can't really get pinpoint numbers and have that be truly meaningful. You really need a better understanding of the entire system and how all of the different pieces fit together for that biological component to make sense. And we're still working on figuring out what those numbers really should be, how they all fit together. And you get, these, all these labs are saying, oh, well, if I do this one test, that'll give me a number. Well, okay, that's great, but that number doesn't mean anything on its own. It can't function in a vacuum. So I think that's one of the things that really does make it, we don't have a prescription yet for that kind of information.
No.
Well, and so I'll go back to something that connected what 2 of you guys said. Jason said that the microbial component is just the the unknown or the very diverse thing that's really hard to pin down. And Lisa, like you said, the chemical and the physical are what we're familiar with because it's always what we've tested. So if you were to kind of break those portions, chemical, physical, and microbiology or biological, what piece of the pie would the perfect soil health system kind of fit into, or a soil health testing system? Lean heavy on microbial, and that's kind of why we're not there yet? Or should it lean more heavily on the chemical and the physical ones that we can kind of hang our hat on right now?
I think for me, it would be more of an even distribution, because while you can make changes based on different things that you measure, I think even with our familiarity with the physical and the chemical, we are starting to understand more and more how all of those three work together. And so you can't really push for one over the other, in my opinion. I think a lot of the push right now is for the biological component, because we just don't know a lot about it. People have been collecting that data, but it is so highly variable, just like all soils data really is, that it's kind of at the forefront right now, because we're trying to figure out what those numbers should be, or what those ratios should look like. But I don't think I would, I think part of it would be depending on what your system history is. You know, for each farmer, it might be different. If you've been really managing for specific things, maybe you're pretty good for a given definition of good on your physical properties, but some of these other ones, you know, kind of middle ground. That being said, I also think that if you're really managing for like improved aggregate stability and soil stability, you're probably also indirectly doing things that would improve what we would consider biological benefits and chemical benefits, just maybe not on purpose.
What do you think, Jason, on the what's a good soil health testing program? What kind of is that breakdown? Like, do you rely more heavily on one or the other?
I kind of liked what Lisa just said about if you're managing for, aggregate stability or one particular thing, you're most likely managing for the improvement of other things. That concept should ring, or at least is thoughtful, I would say, because when I look out and I listen to, I don't, study the microbial community in depth like Lisa does, so I'll yield to her expertise on that. But when I talk to my colleagues in some of these projects that I'm involved with, and they're looking at some of these biological things like the PFLA and all these different things that have come to the forefront as information that people want, and they say, well, we're starting to see differences, and I say, well, how long has it taken you to where you're starting to see differences? And they'll say, well, it's been 5 years under this management. I say, okay, that's good. So you'll have information in 5 to 10 years on how specific management influences a specific soil in space and time. And I've got a state where I have calcareous soils that are farmed under 15-inch rainfall environments, and I have soils that are farmed under 45-inch rainfall environments. Some of them are 2 feet deep, and some of them are 8 feet deep. Some of them have naturally high organic matter levels, and some of them have very low organic matter levels. Some of them have high pHs throughout the profile, and some may be acidic at depth and at the surface, or everything in between. And so then I ask the question, how much of all that information do you have to then interpret something that takes 5 to 10 years to change? Does that make sense? And so if we're going to manage things, then why not manage them for, something that we like to limit compaction or maintain residue or maintain organic matter, those things that we can actually visually observe or easily analyze. And the complexity of the biology will take care of itself. That's kind of the premise of my argument.
Well, I mean, that's kind of
what so damn complicated, and I don't see anybody trying to destructure or deconstruct all that to where you can actually understand it. Because like for soil testing, we know we need a different soil test for phosphorus in the Panhandle than what we do downstate if we want to do it right.
That's kind of what I was sitting here, is that both of you said if you take care of the other ones, the third will take care of itself. So, I mean, inherently, if we do rely on those other two that we know, shouldn't the third then take care of itself? I mean, that's kind of been our mentality in the past, and maybe it hasn't served us as well as we think it has. And so, I mean, is there, I guess there needs to be maybe a little bit more aggressive looking into that third that we don't know, because we thought, you know, having good chemical for, you know, chemical conditions in the soil for our crops might not necessarily be the right ones for good diverse soil microbial communities.
Well, and I think part of the shift is that there is more and more of a push for from different arenas for different goals. So for a very long time, it was make the most out of the land that you could get. We need the most of whatever crop you're growing and get it shipped out. But that's not become as cost effective anymore, because you have to put more and more resources into that system to maintain that kind of growth. So more and more, when you do like monoculture production, which was the norm for a long time, you need more and more fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and that kind of thing. And so people started to realize, well, I can't keep doing this. So we start planning on rotations and that kind of stuff. So I do think that they all kind of work together and work out together. Where I think the biological comes into, I don't know, and I hate to say this, but I don't know it'll ever be something where you can, you know, write a recommendation for biological component like you can for like add fertilizers to meet these needs. But I think it gives us a level, a way to understand why certain things are doing what they're doing. It gives us that sort of additional information to look for. Okay, I'm seeing an increased microbial community, and I'm seeing growth in specific organisms or specific groups of organisms, which are helping with increasing nutrient cycling, like a carbon cycling enzyme or phosphorus or nitrogen cycling enzymes. And that's in turn boosting productivity in other ways. So for one example, we were working with a producer who's running a cattle operation. He's overseeding every winter with winter annuals for grazing specifically, because he wants to have that basically southern Louisiana 365 days of grazing if he can get it. And what we were seeing is that he hasn't been adding any fertilizer to his field, and his inorganic nitrogen is decreasing, but his actual total nitrogen numbers are either steady or slightly increasing, but we're not seeing any decrease in growth from his forage production. And so what we're looking at is that nitrogen is there. It's just not in a form that's we're used to measuring as plant available, but the microbial community and the enzymes are responding to help break that nitrogen down, release it into a form that the plants can then make use of. So even though, you know, those clues that we typically look for, like inorganic nitrogen numbers, are indicating that he should be seeing a decrease in vegetative production, we're not actually seeing that in his field. And so that's, you know, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, okay, I would, if I had just done chemical analysis, I would have said, well, you need to add fertilizer to this because your nitrates are pretty low. But he hasn't seen any need for that in his production.
Well, so let me bring the thing up that hasn't been discussed. It's kind of, we've kind of skirted around it, is what role does crop productivity have in soil health? You know, we've for the longest time done a sustainable system to where we focused on both the conservation and the productivity. Now we're kind of focusing solely on the conservation. Where does the crop productivity kind of fall in what is a good, healthy soil?
I mean, I think it's one of the more important things, because the whole idea behind soil health and soil quality is that you have a productive system. And so the productivity of that plant, whether it's a crop or grasses or whatever it is that you're looking for, that's the indicator. If the grasses aren't doing well, or the crop isn't doing well, then something's not in balance. And so having that crop productivity is a very important part. I think one issue is that, what does that productivity look like? And it may not look like what you're used to seeing, where you're putting out as much fertilizers and everything that you can on the system. And I think that's a scary part for a lot of people, is your numbers may or may not be similar to what your neighbor's doing, where he's putting out, the maximum amount of fertilizer he can. And we've had producers that can do, pretty well on some of those practices. So, but I think it's important.
Yeah, the productivity pays for all this stuff, right? If it's not productive, then we just put it back to grass and let the cattle eat it, and then let the guys hunt it so that it has some value. But so the productivity pays for it, and it's interesting because Lisa made a comment about, it may look different depending on what you're doing. And in my career, in 2000, I came here in 2008. And at that time, we had very little no-till, but we had very rapid adoption occurring at the time. And one of the big discussions we were having is whether or not you could run cattle on cropland that was under no-till dual-purpose wheat. And everybody said no. That's the general consensus is that you could not run cattle on no-till cropland in 2008. And now everybody in the world says that that's the thing to do, just for the reason that Lisa mentioned. And there's a lot of good work that showed that you could do it, and actually improves the nutrient cycling, because it's going to knock down some of the like high seed-in ratio type material that you'd have otherwise, and do some things to the microbes apparently that are beyond my expertise. But back then people said you couldn't do it. And I would argue that if you could not graze no-till in Oklahoma, where half the cropland is grazed annually, then you're not going to have much adoption of no-till. And then you fast forward, and that was, in 2008, grain prices were pretty high, so nobody wanted to give up grain yield for a few pounds of beef. And then grain prices went into the tank, and cattle prices looked decent, so people started talking about grazing cover crops as a way to offset the cost of the cover crops. Well, now everybody's grazing cover crops, and they don't worry so much about the grain because the grain's not worth much, especially in these kind of systems. And now we see that grain's coming back in its value, and it'll be interesting to see, just like any typical dual purpose graze out grain only type rotation in Oklahoma on wheat, is you're going to see a shift towards a more interest in growing the grain than growing the beef, if the grain is worth more than the beef. And so I agree 100%. It'll change we will see changes in what the productivity look like, whether it's from grazing or from grain production, and how we manage the system. The microbes are important because they do decompose the organic material and help with cycling of nutrients and pathogens, managing pathogens and all that good stuff. But it is extremely complex, and it's frustrating to have this idea where we could go out and predict things with these numbers, versus what Lisa said is understand what's happening with these analysis, because the predictive nature of them is very challenging.
Well, and so I'll ask kind of one more general question before we get down in the nuts and the bolts is, if you look at a lot of verbiage on documentation now, we've moved conservation practices to soil health practices. Does that shift what we talk about in these practices, or what is the difference between what we used to call conservation practices and what we now call soil health practices?
I don't think much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they may have shifted the focus to what exactly they were, but yeah, not really. I mean, it's all basically the same practices.
Well,
The only
so
thing I would say is it shifted any kind of interest that we had at all in structural erosion control completely away from structural erosion control to simply whole fields soil surface management, aka crop rotations and keeping the ground covered and all that, which is all good. But you do need terraces and you do need to maintain terraces. And anybody that says otherwise will probably not come and talk to you about what happens to your farm after a 20-inch month of May in Oklahoma, no matter what kind of no-till you've got.
well,
Yeah,
so
our problem's not in terraces, it's field drains and getting that water off the field. Um, but in in less than chocolate milk form would be preferable.
Yeah.
so that's on the logistic side of things. But in our recent survey we've done over the last couple of years, you mentioned the word soil health as you would in soil health practices, and over 50% of producers surveyed designate soil health and cover crops as synonymous with one each other. Where conservation practices were more synonymously either, like you said, Jason, in more structural control, terraces and infill drainage and ditches, as well as no-till. So kind of how do we shift the fact that we have this new term, which a lot of producers think that it's cover crop, but in reality, it's just a focus on the soil as an end goal, rather than just passively through improvement in soil loss.
I don't know.
I mean, that's a big.
Seems like the cat's out of the bag. I mean, that the soil health and cover crops being synonymous with each other, and then everything else being conservation, it makes sense that that's the perception of growers, and it's somewhat frustrating because we have crop rotation, and we in Oklahoma we have a tremendous ability. We have a tremendous opportunities for crop rotation in a lot of the state. You go down to southwest Oklahoma, those guys know how to grow cotton. They're very profitable cotton growers. So they're going to grow cotton. And when they need ground cover in that system, they can cover crop that system. And it'd be very productive and be greatly improved with that cover crop because it reduces the wind damage, wind erosion, decreases soil temperatures and all that stuff prior to canopy. And it's very useful in that low residue continuous cropping system. Same thing with soybeans in the Northeast. If guys don't want to rotate out of soybeans because they can grow such good soybeans, cover crops are good. But you go out in western central Oklahoma where we can grow corn, milo, wheat, beans, sesame, cotton, all these things, and none of them are dominantly more profitable than any other. Then the cover crop deal may not make as much sense because you can manage the residue cover by growing wheat and you can, infuse some biological nitrogen by growing beans and things like this, and you can run cattle on all of this. And so the need for covers are not as critical, but yet it's sold as the cure all for everything. And it's always challenging when you when you have something that's synonymous with a single management practice.
Well, Lisa, I'll let you kind of go forward with what Jason said on the question, or have this in mind. I want to know your opinion with everybody saying that a living root is better than a dead root. On the no-till, having an actively growing crop is better than just having residue with the dead root. So what similar question with the soil health practices being more associated with cover crops, and how does that fit in with a no-till system with we'd rather it be green than brown for most of the year?
I mean, I would say that in general, a living root is going to be more proportionally beneficial than a dead one, just because you're getting that excretion of exudates and that kind of. And I'm not a plant person, so not an expert on that part. But having that interaction between the living organism and the soil is going to provide benefits, because it's going to be sort of feeding into that, and that plant's going to be sucking in carbon through photosynthesis, and then that's going to get distributed into the soil. So if you were to like put them on a scale, I would put like a living root system, whether that's, you know, rotation crops or planting multiple crops in the same year, or having cover crops in your in your system, is going to be more beneficial. But having that residue and that cover there is going to still provide you that protection. And I think part of it does come from what is your end goal. You know, if the primary goal is I want to keep something covering my soil, and you can achieve that with a residue, then that's what you do. If the system will work with, and you can get cover crops to be a part of that system, you know, I would say go for it. But yeah, I look at cover crops as a tool for conservation, not the magic, you know, the silver bullet we always talk about. And so while I would say that, you know, if you can have a system that has a living root in it the majority of the year, that's going to be somewhat more successful or beneficial, than just having that residue, from a few different perspectives. Because yeah, those roots are going to be feeding that soil system.
Well, so what is each of your opinion on the benefit of rest? You know, not having something actively growing, that system rest from a crop perspective as well as a microbial perspective. You know, Jason, we know we get it from a crop perspective, especially here in Oklahoma with water recharge and all that. But, you know, from a crop and a soils perspective, what is that benefit of a fallow rest period?
Well, I'll make a comment about some folks I've heard talk about cover crops and keeping it green and all this stuff, and they say they want to emulate nature by planting cover crops, none of which are native to the ground that they're planting them in. And then you can look around in that landscape, and the nature is not green year round in most of Oklahoma. There's parts of it where you might have green year round in eastern Oklahoma, but the vast majority of our cropland is out west, and there's not a lot of green in the native pastures and woodlands in western Oklahoma in the wintertime. So they're resting. And you can say they're resting because it's too cold for anything to grow, but there are environments where there would be green year round, and there's not. And so I kind of use that as an example, is like there is value to rest. And some environments you can keep green year round. Whether it's beneficial, it would depend on the rotation, the base rotation, in my opinion. But a lot of times in western Oklahoma, at least, not even nature's green year round. And so there's something to be said about a rest period for these soils, as long as you can keep them covered. You know, you let them rest with just soybean stalks out there for very long, and they're going to start to erode. Same thing with cotton stalks. And so if you don't want to plant wheat behind that and then grow a crop of wheat, then you might plant a cover crop during that fallow period. But I think rest can be useful.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that the microbes are never really resting.
Nope.
So that's where like those systems that are low residue for like the main crop, having something that's leaving behind a little extra residue, you know, maybe it's not green living root systems, but having that little extra residue, because I know for what, granted right now, everything breaks down because it rains 68 inches a year here. But even when I was in the Texas Panhandle, You know, having some kind of residue that's going to break down. If it gets in contact with the soil and the microbes and organisms can get to it, that stuff's going to break down over time. So having something that's even just putting residue back into the system is going to be beneficial, because some of these low residue crops that we have make it hard, because they're not really leaving anything to the for long-term cover.